All right, ready to roll.
Ready to roll.
So,
All right, Mr. J, thank you for being here. Uh, Go ahead and get started.
yeah, tell us a little about yourself, your background.
All right. First of all, I want to thank you guys for having me on your podcast. It's an honor and my pleasure to do so. I can only assume that you're starting at the bottom, so that way you could only go up from here. So I'm assuming that's why I'm here. But I'll do my best. I'll do my best to give you the information you're trying to get for you and your listeners.
All right. Where did you get started in criminal justice? I know you have a PhD, so explain to everybody about a little bit about that.
Okay. Well, as I said, my name's Jay Callegari. I'm a retired game warden. I was in law enforcement for 23 years total. Um, I started off in Cottonport Police Department, which is a very small town. I then moved on to be the chief of police in Plocherville, which is an even smaller town. And from there, I was hired as a Louisiana game warden, which I finished out my career there and retired about 6 years ago. Now, what's interesting about the way that I was educated is that I'm not front end educated, I'm back end educated. So all my education came after I had spent a career's worth in the field practicing law enforcement, and then I learned why we practiced it. And like I said, retired about 6 years ago. After retiring, I finished a bachelor's degree. Within about 6 months, I was very close to finishing it. And then I finished a master's degree in a little over a year. And then I completed the coursework for my PhD in about 2 years. And I'm still working on my doctoral research, which is on criminal justice reform and factors affecting legislation around it. So that's where I'm at right now. I'm a college professor. I teach at Louisiana State University at Alexandria. I teach criminal justice there. And I teach at Southern New Hampshire University online, of course. And that's what I'm doing post career, I guess you could say. So that's where we get to where we are today.
Okay. So you had mentioned that you had like a back door is what you called it, education, where you started kind of after your career. What most people don't go to
So
college after you have your career. So
right.
what made you want to do that?
So there's two different types of college professors, and mostly what you have is when you have a professor who went to college, he got his undergraduate, he got his graduate, got his PhD, and began immediately teaching or researching or doing something like that, and never actually worked in the field that they're in, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. The other one is somebody who worked in the field their entire life. Usually, you'll see lawyers do it, sometimes biologists, sometimes engineers will do it, and they'll go back and get a PhD and they'll teach after they've been in the field. I've heard both sides at universities like practitioners, people who have been practitioners in the field, and that they don't like it, that they'd rather somebody who just has an academic background. I haven't seen that discrimination either way in my work. But when I when I retired and went back to school and walked the halls of academia, if you will, uh, I learned more about what I should have been doing throughout my whole career, and it enables me to see both ends of that spectrum. So when I teach my students, I'm not only telling them this is how it's done. I'm telling them why it's done and how it's done because I've done both sides of it. So I think the practitioner part, of course, you can't always have every college professor can't be a retired policeman, but if you could, I think that adds a lot of material to your teaching.
So coming from the police field recently, like there's a lot of problems with police officers and um police brutality and stuff like that. So when you were in the force, it was a different time, a lot of different rules. What is your thoughts on like how it's evolved to today? So like you today we see one bad crime, like we know about it because of social media.
Right.
Do you think that was relevant back then? It still happened and it just wasn't talked about, or has things got worse?
Everybody having a camera in their pocket 24 hours a day has changed the way we view the world, not just in law enforcement, but everything. Um, Anything that happens anywhere is being recorded at all times. Not just with the camera in your pocket, but surveillance cameras everywhere. They're cheap now. They're all over the place. Everything is recorded. So I don't know if law enforcement got any worse in the way they were treating people, or if now everybody can see how some law enforcement treats some people in some areas, and it's assumed that that's done all over. And it's definitely not done all over. There's plenty of very professional police departments, and that starts with leadership in the department, and it has a roll down effect where if you have bad leadership that lets some of this stuff go, where they're not treating people like they're supposed to treat people, it's gonna trickle down to the entire force. If you have good leadership and that's not tolerated in a department, you're hardly going to hear from them. Of course, you're going to have one bad guy every now and then. There's bad people in every profession. They have bad milkmen. They have bad auto mechanics. They have bad doctors. So you're going to find that everywhere. But in those fields, people's civil rights aren't necessarily violated on film. So
So how does that, how does like police brutality or like abuse, anything like that, how does that start? Is that bad people going into the field, or is it people who realize they have some authority and they tend to abuse it?
So there's a couple of ways. It is bad people going to the field, and I don't know if they intend to do that when they started off. You're hardly going to ever find your first year or second year or third year police officer that is going to be treating the public unfairly, because when they go in, they have this mindset of that they're doing good and they're trying to do good. Well, they get a little jaded over time after after they get in trouble, or they see the same crackhead every day beating his wife or something, and it changes the way they feel about people, changes the way they think. So they have a whole different mindset from the person who gets up in the morning, goes to work, and comes home and doesn't have to see this every
Yeah,
day.
you don't see.
So you're right on both parts of that. It is the bad person, but it also the bad leadership that allows it to happen.
So we mentioned the cell phone cameras and stuff. So do you think technology has played a role in the evolution? So like with the DNA testing getting better, has that made, let's say, a police officer's life easier? I mean, not I'm not to say easier, but has it
Yeah.
locked more criminals away, basically, is what I'm trying to ask.
Yes, yes, and no. And let me tell you why. People are under the assumption that all police departments can take fingerprints and take DNA and have all this stuff within an hour, like on a TV show. And it's much more antiquated than that. It's much more up to date than it was 20, 30 years ago, but it's not the way people think. That technology has helped us with in the form of databases, in the form of being able to find out information quickly about people. But as far as what people think, that you're going to catch a bad guy because all this technology we have, it might take 6 months to get to send a drug to the lab to get it certified to say it's a drug. And that's just something that's simple. They put a little, it's in a line of other things. So while technology has helped, it has slowed down the process. It bogs it down because the public thinks that it's readily available and it's not.
How have you seen it? How have you seen it evolve since you first started?
How have I seen the technology evolve? Well, again, everybody having a cell phone in their pocket. Also, uh, when I started law enforcement, we had radios and handhelds that we would have to call in a license plate or call in a number or whatever. Now, just about every department has computers in their vehicles, and it goes straight to the DMV or whatever, NCIC, whatever you're looking for to find what you need. So in that effect, it's changed the way we do business. But I guess maybe a forensic pathologist or a forensic investigator would be able to answer that a lot better as far as the technology than I could.
Mind sliding the mic a little closer, just a little bit. Thank you. Let's see.
One main question we had, like, how does mental health evolve? I mean, how does mental health play a factor
That's a good
into
question.
like,
And let me,
On both sides too, both sides, the police officer's mental health, because I think that's a big deal if you're
okay,
witnessing all that, and the criminal's mental health.
let's talk about it from a systemic level, then we'll talk about it on an individual level. Systemically, the criminal justice system has uh, gone in a circular fashion from what's called a rehabilitative or medical model back to a retributive model. You understand the difference? The rehabilitative or medical would be more where we would focus on healing them and rehabilitating them, where the retribution or retributive model says, let's put all the people in jail, lock them up. And that's usually predicated by cyclical advances in the politics around it. So if you have a bunch of Republicans in charge, usually they'll say, put them in jail, and they'll make their campaign promises. We're gonna lock all the bad guys up. Well, that's just not possible. We can't lock all the bad guys up. We don't have the money or the place to do it. In fact, America has the largest prison system in the entire world, and Louisiana was first, now is second, has the largest second largest prison system in the United States. This is the prison capital of the entire world. So you think locking them up helps? I mean, we've got to find another way to do it, and they have found other ways. If you remember, before I was born and before y'all were born, they had insane asylums. Have you heard of them?
Oh yeah.
And that's where criminally insane people would go. They would do something that they were just insane criminally, and they would go there and they would get care from a psychiatrist, and they would have nurses, and they would lock them up in the rooms. You've seen the padded rooms with the people in and stuff. We don't have very many of those anymore. A lot of those people that would have gone to those places are now in our prison system, and so we put them in there, and they're not being healed. They're not being treated, and we let them back out and expect a different result, and they just recidivate. They go right back in.
So, sorry, but what do you do then?
Well, that's a systemic level synopsis of it, right? The answer is, what do you do? That's a whole different answer. When we look at the social sciences and you look at other sciences, let's look at engineering, or let's look at math, or let's look at biology. When you 1 + 1 = 2, you put this chemical in with this chemical, you have this reaction, and we kind of know what we can do. So what can we do to solve this problem? This is what we can do. When you're talking about the social sciences, there are 8 billion problems and there's 8 billion solutions. Every person is different and every person reacts differently to a solution. So that's a good question, and I wish I had the answer to what do we do to solve that. Now we can do research and we can look at ways that we can remedy that. That's been shown to work. Peer-reviewed, scholarly research has been done that's been shown to work. And if we use that slowly, we can eat away at it. But when you look at the nexus of politics and academic research, there's a problem. The politicians are not going to always listen to what the academics say works. The politicians are going to do what their constituents want so they can get reelected. So if we could make it to where the politicians would understand the research a little better sometimes and do what may not be politically advantageous to them, but would be what works, perhaps we could get more of that through and get more answers.
So, how big of a problem do you think it is, like compared to like the rest of problems that any politician can go through?
It's a pretty big problem because you have to make those decisions, and you're trying to do what your constituents would want, but you also need to do what works, and you're spending their money, and in the end, if it doesn't work, you've wasted their money. So it's a big problem, and that's kind of what my current research is on.
You want to dive into like what your current research is?
So my current research is on. I'm not going to dive into it because we can talk for about 24 hours on it, but it's on that what I just mentioned, the nexus of where policy meets politics and research, and what factors would influence a lawmaker to use those academically, or to vote for and fund policy and law and programs for academically sound research. So, in other words, let me put it in layman's terms. A law is coming through that says if we provide psychotherapy, if we provide psychotherapy to young mothers before they have their children, and we have sent somebody in house to, and once we find out they're pregnant, they get on the WIC or whatever, and we go talk to them, and we provide prenatal care and psychotherapy to them, telling them how they should raise their kid, what's going to affect their life coming up in the future, and we've had meta studies that show that program works, but it's going to cost $1 million. No politician's going to vote. That's not locking anybody up. That's not adding to a criminal, making another crime. That's not they can't put a really feather in their cap, because you're not going to see the results from that till they're not a politician anymore. So it's really hard for them to vote on that. It's not going to help them in their career, but they have to understand that it does help what they want to do in the future.
So all of government works really slow.
Sure.
Do you think that's a problem? Because the amount of let's for example, the fentanyl problem, that's a pretty recent problem. Do you think the laws are playing ever catch up? They're just trying to catch up to the current problems, and they just never will. Or do you think there's a way
Sometimes by the time they catch up, the problem's gone.
Yeah, or there's a new problem.
The crack epidemic is something else. But yeah, you're right. The wheels move very slow.
So you think some things will just always be there will always be problems in that area?
You're always going to have crime, and you're not going to get rid of crime in a democratic society. It's going to be there. The good news is that crime has been going down for 20 or 30 years, even though you wouldn't know it reading the news. but crime has been going down. We're doing better. Police departments are more professional. Uh, there's less corruption in police departments than there ever was in the past. And part of that is due to technology because we can watch where the cops are going, see how long they're there. They're filming their whole day, their whole shift. So I mean, they really can't go take a payoff somewhere if they're filming everything they're doing all day.
How much is that monitored, do you think?
I mean, it depends on the policy of the department. But if I had, and they're not going to look at it unless there's a problem. But I mean, if they there's a problem, somebody's with a individual officer or unit or whatever, they have people that'll look at it.
That seems like another problem because like there's so many small police departments. It seems like a lot of places are going to like a county or parish wide
Right.
police system. Do you think that's a better system since it's everything's more uniform? You
Yeah.
have a more
Let me tell you what I've done. Some of my research is on that. It's called amalgamation. It's a big word. All it means is we're going to not overlap forces anymore. So if you go 2 miles down the road, you have the city of Cottonport, which has a police officer, and they have jurisdiction there. You also have the sheriff's office, which has jurisdiction in the same spot, and you also have the state police. They can all arrest the same guy in the same spot, three different departments getting paid. So if you were to say in a parish like our parish, get rid of all the police departments, the small town police departments, and you have just the sheriff's office conducting all the law enforcement in the parish, you could have more highly trained officers, better paid because you take that tax base from all these towns, you'd be able to raise their pay, and you have more professional law enforcement that, and they probably have to have some substations around the parish, but you would have, like I said, every policy there'd be policies for the whole parish. Whereas some of these small town police departments, they can't pay their guys very good. They have very low tax bases. And when you can't pay people good, you can't get professional people. When you can't get professional people, you get people who are going to make mistakes and not understand people's civil rights. And they're going to fight when they shouldn't be fighting. And they're going to escalate situations when they should be de escalating. And that's not their fault. They're getting paid $10 an hour when they're not getting trained the way they should. It's the fault of the system.
and so why do you think this hasn't happened yet? If there's not
It has in some places. Uh, as as the world gets smaller, we uh we don't have our little towns anymore. You can see little towns all over the country. You don't have the mom and pop stores anymore. So the world is getting smaller. Those tax bases are dwindling, and it is happening places. There's plenty of parishes where they have a parish-wide law enforcement. There's plenty of counties all over the country where they do that. Where you don't have those overlapping of forces wasting money.
So you think we eventually will, like Falls Parish will?
Yeah, it'd be 50 years from now, but we will.
yeah. So I know you're doing the home rule charter. Can you explain a little bit what that is and how it's going?
Again, that could be a 3 hour conversation as well.
A brief summary, because I know you did another podcast on it. And
I'm gonna give a brief summary on it, and let's look at it from a systemic level as well, and a political science and democratic theory. So we look at it from that level, then I'll explain what it does. When in democracy, when you have separation of powers, when they started America, where actually when France invented democracy in what the 1700s, we the separation of powers create a balance of power between the two, and they have checks and balances with each other. So you have your legislative, executive, and judicial. Everybody knows that. Well, when America began and we started moving westward, and we were inhabiting areas that had never been inhabited. You had the Wild Wild West. Remember the Wild Wild West? You always heard people would kill everybody. Well, we said if we want people to live here, they have to feel safe. To feel safe, they have to have law enforcement. So to have law enforcement, you have to have a way to pay law enforcement. So the original police jury system across the country 208 years ago was set up so that when these new areas were found, you could have a group of people that were elected called the police jury, and they would collect the tax money for businesses that were in that new area, and they would pay the courthouse. They'd run the courthouse, and they'd run the sheriff's department. So we could arrest people, and we could put them through the process, and that was all they did. They didn't have to pay for roads. There was no such thing. They didn't have drainage. They didn't have employees. They didn't have any of these things that we have today. So that whole system was only meant to start an area. So when our towns and cities started growing, we realized we need these checks and balances. We have to have somebody steering the ship. So we have mayors. That's why every town in the country has a mayor and a council. We wouldn't think of a town without a mayor, yet we still have places, counties, and parishes in Louisiana that don't have a mayor of your parish system. They don't have a president of the parish system. They just have this council that's part time that meets once a month, and we expect that to work. And what our police jury has said is that they are both the executive and legislative branch in one, which is completely impossible the fact, just the word branch means they are different, they're separated, and it's just, and if we get home rule charter started in Avoyelles, it's basically writing a constitution for our parish. You've heard people say the free state of Avoyelles, right? Well, we could have our own constitution that has laws and has rules and has a system that follows our demographics and our parish and the layout of everything here. So I guess real quickly just to finish it, because like I said, I could talk for hours.
Yeah.
The process is, once we get 10% of the voters to sign a petition saying that they want a charter written, then we will write that charter. Once the charter is written, which will probably have things like term limits for our councilman, police jurors, parish president, mayor, whoever. We'll probably also have a parish president, mayor, and a council, and we'll dual out the powers between those two uh, when we write that charter.
Did all I'm on the text there. Sorry to interrupt.
And so once that's written, once that charter is written, the people will get to vote on it. They want to pass it or not. If they pass it, we'll have effectively changed the government of Avoyelles Parish from a police jury system to a home rule charter system, and that's the basis of it.
And so for people of Vols, where can you get this signed if they want to sign?
And
Or-
there is 100 places to sign it right now. It's all over.
so all the Sean's locations.
All the Sean's
pretty sure.
locations. There's places in Marksville. In fact, instead of naming them, you should probably join the Facebook page, We the People of Avoyelles Parish. It's important to put parish on the end because there's an old site called We the People of Avoyelles, and this one, when you look at it, it's going to have a picture saying "Sign the petition" on it. If you join that Facebook page, or you can go to homerulecharteravoyelles.com. That's our webpage. Has information on there too. It has places where you can go get it signed.
Thank you.
All right.
Move back to some criminal justice stuff.
Sounds good. Switch gears a little bit. Go
All right.
back
That's fine.
to the interesting stuff.
Do you know like any like discriminatory laws that we have in effect today? And
So it's funny you should say that because I was just looking at some of the laws that were passed. You ever heard of Jim Crow? You know what that is?
Oh yeah.
You know what Jim Crow laws is? So your listeners will probably know what it is, right? So during that time, other laws were passed that weren't necessarily didn't name a group of people in them, but they were made with a group of people in mind. When they made marijuana illegal, the main people that were using it was your black community. And they made the law so strict on marijuana, ridiculously strict, the same as very, very hard drugs. And it ended up imprisoning just millions and millions over the years of black people because the cop would catch them with one little joint. And that was more in their culture than it was the other. Nowadays, we know it's in white culture just as much as black culture, but still black people get arrested for it much more often. Black people encompass 12.9% of our country. And whenever I teach a cultural diversity class, and when it's in Louisiana is where I teach it. So when I ask the students, what percentage of America do you think is black? Typically the answer is 40% or 50% or 60%, because that may be where their neighborhood is. And they're so surprised to hear that only 12.9% of all Americans are black, because there's vast areas where there's no minorities in the whole country. So when we look at only 12.9% of America being black, and we look at 65% of our prisons being filled with black people, it doesn't take a genius to do the math on that and see that there's something systemically wrong somewhere. That's not all cultural. Not that a black man is 4 times more likely to get arrested than a white man anywhere, anytime, no matter what amount of money they make. And these stats just keep rolling when you go into healthcare, when you go into education, when you go into ability to get credit and buy a house. I mean, these stats just keep rolling into it. And when I teach the class, I don't tell the students. I say I give them each a subject and say, find out if there's any disparity in getting a credit card for your black. And I'll ask each one. They have a different thing in healthcare. I said, don't listen to me. I want you to look at it, and they'll look it up, and they'll come, man, I had never realized. They start reading about it, on some, not some trashy websites, some real websites that have real information, and they're really they're surprised to hear that. And so, to answer your question, there's an argument on how much of it is cultural and how much of it is systemic, but I don't think there's an argument to say that at least some of it is systemic that we can do better on and change. When you start looking at these numbers, I tell people, when you really, really dive into these numbers and look at it, you're either you're either a racist or you don't know math, because you have to understand that there's something going on that's not fair for an entire group of people in this country. So to answer your question, yeah, there's a lot of them.
Is there any specific ones come to mind?
Well, like I said, the marijuana laws come to mind. Some of your traffic laws. I mean, when we see probable cause, a lot of times probable cause that's uh, that's used is used in these black neighborhoods more often for BS stuff. I guess you could say some stuff that's not really. They wouldn't stop this same car for that in a white neighborhood. In a lot of places, and they're doing that just to search them, check them out, see if they have a warrant, or ID, or license, whatever.
So we talked about uh, bias laws or discriminatory laws
Mhm.
with drugs mainly. What is your stance on, say, marijuana legalization or
Right.
things along that?
When uh, when marijuana was legalized in Colorado, which was, I don't know, 10 years ago, and I'm guessing, I don't know. There was this big uproar. They said, "Oh my God, there's going to be wrecks everywhere. There's going to be people dying. There's going to be high people walking around like zombies all over the place." And what they found 1 year later, when they look back at it, is that car crashes actually went down, crime went down all over, and the schools had an extra $100 million or something to spend on stuff. And nothing really bad happened from it. When you look at people at companies who lobby against legalization of marijuana, you know what the two biggest lobbyists against legalization of marijuana are? Can you guess?
Pharmaceutical companies.
What?
I'd say
Oh,
tobacco
probably alcohol.
companies,
Yeah, alcohol.
like
A lot
cigarette.
of people say the churches or the religionists.
That would make sense, yeah.
The two biggest lobbyists against legalization of marijuana are your gambling industries and your alcohol industries.
Gambling.
Yeah, again, because they make a lot of money. People, I
From
guess, I guess it doesn't lower your inhibitions enough to waste money on gambling. I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So when we look at that study, that's an interesting study behind it. But we can also look at, we talked about that problem of overcrowding in prisons. I mean, just think if you take that drug that 60% of the people arguably use and make it completely legal across the country, think how many less people are going to be arrested for that. Think how much more room we'd have in our prisons to put the really bad guys, the rapists and the murderers, and the really heavy drug users who are robbing us and stealing us blind because they want to get that hit or whatever.
And it's
So,
just tax money and money you're saving
yeah.
in the prisons.
So when we look at the research and what we've done so far, and when we look at the background of the marijuana laws, and when we look at the public sentiment on it, from a criminal justice point of view, my opinion, based on all those factors and the research I've done, is that it should be legalized. The problem I'm seeing is that we haven't really found a foolproof way when we stop somebody driving that's on marijuana to prove what level of marijuana they're on to say that they shouldn't be driving and inebriated.
Because I've heard some things, like I listen to podcasts and stuff. In California, they legalized it. It's good for California, made a lot of money. But the problem with their legalization is to get, I guess it's the license to sell, basically, was so expensive. Like the street dealers, they're way more profitable.
Yeah.
Because you don't have to, no taxes, you don't have to pay for the licenses. So
Yeah.
street dealing is still going on.
That was going to be the problem in Louisiana. I think it was last year or the year before. I don't remember which session it was. I was watching it closely. I was watching all the criminal justice bills, but that one particular, they had it started off really good, and then you had amendments that were making it so expensive and charging a tax per gram, and it was all kind of stuff that you weren't putting you weren't putting the drug dealer out of business. The people were still going to go to the drug dealers because it was too expensive to buy it at the store because it was tax prohibitive. Now, if they were smart, what the legislature would do is they would start it off cheap. They would put the drug dealers out of business, and then they could raise the taxes on it and get it at least a street level price where they make more on taxes. Because if that's what you have to do, you have to put them out of business. And look, a lot of your drug dealers that sell more than marijuana, that's their cash cow. That's what the cartels make their money on. Bringing stuff in ships and shipping it here or over the border or whatever. That's the because more people use that 6 times, 10 times more people use that than other drugs. So they're really making a lot of money off it. If you take that money away from them, and you could put your tax money to the war on drugs and really fight a war. You could really fight that war on drugs with that extra money. Right now, we've been losing the war on drugs for 40 years.
Yeah.
I think that would be a turn of the tides to where we could actually win that war if we would legalize marijuana and put our efforts toward fighting the other drugs.
felt like it's just such a waste. Just
Yep. Yeah.
and just like thinking like how much better, like I say, society could be. It's like if you just quit worrying about some guy with a joint or something like that, and then focus on the real criminals.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at the history of America, when was the highest crime rate?
I would guess during World War II,
The
the
highest
Great Depression.
the highest crime rate was during Prohibition.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. Makes sense.
That's when we started with the gangsters, and we had the underground,
Bootleggers
the
and
bootleggers
everything.
and all
Yeah.
that. So right now, we could attribute our high crime to something that everybody's using, or a good bit of people are, and yet it's illegal because we attributed that in the 20s whenever Prohibition was going
Me
on.
by everybody.
I don't know, it just means statistically,
Yeah.
we could call it everybody.
I think, and then some pushback arguments is like, where do you draw the line? So like, if you legalize marijuana,
Right.
then what's next? So like, do you have any opinions like giving out any names of drugs, but like, is there any other drugs in the same situation as marijuana, or do you think it's pretty special in its situation?
It's special because it's something that's natural. Uh, you and I can grow marijuana and smoke it right here this spring. We cannot grow cocaine. We need a couple of acres of the coca plant, and we would have to process it with all kind of chemicals to get it down to the form that it used to get you high. In fact, the way it's used in the way it was originally used in the countries that have it, they would chew it like we chew chewing tobacco, and it would give the sensation like a cup of coffee. It would keep them up and awake to do their work. It wasn't to make cocaine, it takes a lot of work. To make heroin, it takes a lot of poppies. To make marijuana, it takes one marijuana plant and one guy. And that's it. It just you don't have to employ half the country growing it, and and look, we find that with food too. When you take a food source and you narrow it down to one little molecule of it or piece of it, that's bad for you too. When you take all the vegetable oils we have,
Oh, yeah.
the hydrogenated oils, you're taking something that is an oil in nature, and you're taking it away from what it's supposed to be mixed with, and you're isolating it, and we're using it as food. It's the same thing.
Highly concentrated.
Yeah.
So we have like so we say reasons for incarceration, but that I don't think that's right. Factors. Like what are some factors that you've seen that lead to besides race, like
Gotcha.
home life,
Yeah.
Gotcha.
things like that that
Yeah,
lead
like
to being more run-ins with the law?
I got
yeah,
you.
like single parents. Like, what do you know statistics on that you can give us?
The biggest predictor of juvenile delinquency, and there's 20, 30, 40 factors. The biggest factor in us being able to predict if a child is going to become a juvenile delinquent is if they have a teenage mother. Now, that being said, if there's a teenage mother that's in a really good home that has a lot of support and gets married at 18 or 19, of course, those chances go way down. Now, you go second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth, and I do not know the exact order. You're looking at single parent homes is one. Uh, where you live, the socioeconomic status of the area where you live, the demographics of where you live. Um, Education, of course, the area you're in to be able to get a good education.
So I'm guessing like poor areas or
Sure, higher crime.
Yeah.
So that begs the question: if poverty creates crime, do you solve the problem by throwing a bunch of money at poverty, or is poverty simply cultural and not necessarily related to how much money's in your pocket?
Explain that further. I don't quite get.
Okay, if if we can look at crime and we see high crime is in poverty-stricken areas,
Okay.
almost exclusively high crime is in high poverty areas, and we say, well, the problem is poverty. So if these people were given enough money to be middle class or lower middle class instead of low class, then obviously they wouldn't have as much crime. So do you think if you go in there and let's take 20,000 people in the inner city neighborhood, and we call everybody and we say, now you're getting a check for $5,000 a month, you're all of a sudden you're middle class, everybody here. Do you think that would reduce the crime in that area, or that would increase the crime in that area?
I don't know. I don't know if it'd increase it. I don't know if it'd reduce it, but I would
Yeah.
just say like just giving away free money. Like I don't know.
I think the crime would remain pretty much the same. I think it's like once you like if you steal, that's part of you. Like I think it's habitual. I think
Some people have
some for some people, I think it's a habitual.
This is the road I'm going down. Just because you give somebody money does not make that area a higher crime. You need to get a lower crime. You need to give them opportunities. If we give them opportunities to earn money for themselves and to make themselves be middle class or lower middle class rather than low class, those opportunities that they're going to take are going to boost them up to that economic status, maybe even the whole area. And if we can do that, then we can reduce crime. What you typically see though is you get somebody from one of these lower class areas, they get an education or they get a good job. What's the first thing they do? They get out of there. They don't want to. It's high crime there. They don't want to be there, right? So you're still left with the people with the high crime. So and look, when you it's in a city, there's concentric circles of crime, and we can look at those, and there's all kind of ways, all kind of factors we can look at them. But if you're in one of those low income, high crime areas, are you there because you're already at the bottom of the barrel and you never were able to make it out? I mean, because we have to have poor people. Not everybody can be rich. Not everybody can be the same. So, and I'm not saying that that's a solution. I'm throwing some stuff out there for you to think of how we solve this problem. And once you start thinking about that, you can solve problems when you look at it from different angles.
Yeah. So I know you have a thought process solving problems. Can you explain it a little bit?
Okay, and I'm going to try to explain it, and it sometimes it doesn't come across as the way it's supposed to. So just bear with me. It's it's a three-tiered, and actually, after we talked last time, I may add a fourth tier. It's a three-tiered way of thinking that solves problems and doesn't necessarily solve problems, but it can help you understand problems better. So we look at it from three levels. We look at it, the highest level is going to be your philosophical level. This is going to be the caveman. How did we get here from that, right? This is going to be why are we thinking, why did somebody win and somebody lose? We're going to go down to the theoretical level after that. Theoretical level is your education level, your not your education level, your level of education, uh, and how you think about solving problems from a higher level than other people would. And then your bottom level is going to be your productivity level, your day to day level, your problems that people solve back and forth day to day without thinking about why we do things to solve them. They don't know. And then you have your lower levels, you're going to call the street level, which almost brings us all the way back in a circular form back to the philosophical level because that level explains why this level is important. And you can throw a lot of different problems at this, and you almost need to write down as you go the little factors on each level of that. So let's think of a problem we can analyze that with. Um, let's look at well, I don't know if that's a
Do
problem.
like marijuana legalization?
No, because that's more of a modern day problem. But yeah, you could.
Are you saying like one that's already been solved?
Or
No,
I think he's saying like a person. You're talking about a personal problem,
you
like
could.
like a
Could
day to
yeah.
day.
Let's say let's look at let's look at why some countries are rich and some countries are poor. Okay. On a day-to-day level, just every day, we're going to say America's rich, has this much money, Uganda has this much money, South Africa has this much money, Venezuela has this much money. Why does one country have more money than, and why are they more successful? So we can look at on this on your day-to-day and your theoretical level, you're going to look at what are their natural resources, what is their form of government, how do they do that, why are some more than the other. Now let's look at it on an even higher level. Why 2,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago when the world was spreading out and people were going, why did they end up there and they think or act the way they do? And why does this group of people think or act the way they do? And why do we have, let me ask you, why do we have people that are different colors?
I feel like they adapted to wherever they were.
Adapted to their
Whatever.
environment,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And why are they all mixed in with everybody now?
People move,
I
especially
think
like
I
in
think
America, where say we're a melting pot, but
yeah. Now we're able to move.
Because we made
Advances in
because we made
technology.
boats
Yeah.
at first, and then we made planes, and then now
Cars
everybody's
and
everywhere.
trains.
So the way you look, your body type, your skin color, your hair type, everything has to do with uh, your the evolving of your race in the area that it was in. So if we can think of people evolving physically in an area to adapt, to overcome, to survive, to where the fittest survive, can we also think that other factors are at play in how they've adapted? So, and let me throw this at you, and I want you, I'm not saying this in a negative way at all. Let's say somebody in Scandinavia, resources are scarce. There's not a lot of food. There's not a lot of growing season. So people were spread out a lot more because there was a lot less resources. There's a lot less hunting and gathering to do out there. You couldn't live all together in one big bundle because there wasn't enough resources to feed everyone. So they were spread out. So they were more alone. They had to solve problems alone more than other places. Now let's go to the middle of Africa, where you had lions and tigers and bears, and everything was you have to uh, you have to get in a group cohesion to survive there. There was plenty of resources. You had plenty of food. There was animals around you. They could grow stuff. They were around a water source. So they had to learn. They had to evolve genetically to learn how to act as a group.
Be tribal.
So they had to think differently. And it's the same in other cultures in other areas of the world. And now all of a sudden, we've got all these cultures that for arguably hundreds of thousands of years adapted, their whole lives adapted to something. And now we're putting them all in one big pile, expecting them to get along right away. And with technology, the last 200 years, that has just exacerbated to a ridiculous point, never seen in human history, even close to what we have now. So when you want to talk about all these problems in criminal justice and all these other, we can look at it from that standpoint, and that makes sense why everybody's fighting all the time.
Things almost instinctual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Interesting. I never thought about it like that.
See. So that would be your theoretical. I mean, your philosophical looking at it, and then your theoretical. We would look at what we've been talking about, how to solve problems, culturally. And then your day to day, of course, is our court systems, our what we do in our local groups where we have Black History Month and things like that. And you look on the lower level, people just fight because they're in their mind to fight. Something's different than me, I'm going to fight. I hope that explains the levels, and you can do that with a lot of things, and sometimes it's a little complicated, but if we can look at problems from different directions, not just what we see with our own eyes, if we can analyze these on all these levels, I think we can really fully understand why problems exist. And until we understand why they exist, we can't expect to solve them.
Very wise. Sounds good. Yeah, I like that.
You gonna put that on a TikTok?
Thanks. I'll clip it. Yeah. So you have on here. You want to talk about religion and society.
Okay.
So,
All right.
let's hear about that.
Whether you believe nature put us here the way we are, or you believe God put us here the way we are, I think the two act in concert, and here's why. Our religion dictates things, how we live our daily lives. It dictates how we act toward others. It dictates our laws. It dictates societal trends. I would argue that most of these things that religion dictates make us into a better society, make us into a more cohesive society, make us be able to relate to each other and adapt better. So let's take marriage, for example. And I've talked to a lot of people about this in the past. Right now, a lot of our young people are not getting married ever. So what is it? It's a piece of paper you're signing saying you can give half your stuff to them. There's no reason to get married. I don't want to give my name. But when religion tells us to get married, religion isn't telling us that because their God, I mean, they are, but they think they are because their God says that we should get married. In a society of humans, if you have a male and a female and they can stay together and they can raise their children, that child has a much better chance of survival, right? So wouldn't that law, that religious rule, that one religious rule, you get married and then you have kids, fit with society's natural way things are done to say that if two people are together, they promise to be together and they don't run around, then they're going to be able to raise that kid to be a much better adult. He's going to be healthy. He or she's going to be healthier. They're going to be an upstanding citizen and grow up and pay their taxes and make society better going into the future. So when you have that breakdown and people stop getting married, you have single family homes, you have what we talked about earlier. So that's and a lot of your aspects of religion do make society better. And many people need to say or to hear, I'm going to go to hell if I don't follow these laws. And many people need different levels of religion. Some people need like religion really, really high to be good. If they're not in church every week, and if they don't have very strict rules, you have to wear a skirt and you can't do this and you can't do that and listen to heavy metal music on. They need that. Otherwise, they're going to be really bad. But there's some people that can go to a church that's just a natural traditional church, and you go and you worship God with your friends and your family, and you don't have to do all that. You don't have to have all these rules and regulations to be good. So every religion has its purpose in society, just like every function of society to make us happy has its purpose.
So do you think like religion started based on that area's environment?
Religion started, and I'm glad you said that. Religion started when the first caveman came out of his cave, and he had a brain and he could start thinking for himself. And he looked out into the sky and he thought about, where does it end? Where does forever end? And when his brain could not fathom where does forever end, if it ends, what's after it? We don't have the capacity to understand those types of things. You tell me where it ends and then what's past it. So we have to have a God. You have to believe in something bigger than you, because you, evolutionarily, genetically, whatever it is, cannot understand what forever is. We just can't. It's impossible. Until, and I think anybody that says that they don't believe in God, or they don't believe that anything created us or anything, they're still searching for a God. They just are. You can't explain to me how if somebody can actually explain to me like that, if humans ever evolved to that point, we might not need a God. Maybe that's the end of the world. I don't know. What were we talking about before you said that?
No, that was good. Yeah.
Religion and society was the main thing, but
Okay.
I don't know, but like
Oh yeah. It makes you start thinking.
Well,
You know.
and if somebody ever says they're agnostic or they're atheist or whatever, say close your eyes and pretend you're in a spacesuit and you're going out to space and you pass the moon and you pass the planets and you pass stars everywhere and you keep going. What happens then? Where do you go? What ends? I don't know. If you can't explain it, then you have to have faith that there's something bigger than you that can explain it.
I,
that's
that's just like I read Neil deGrasse Tyson's book,
Mhm.
and he's an astrophysicist. That's what he does, and it amazed me how I forgot the exact percentage, but it was like 70 to 80% of the mass of the universe. We don't know what it is,
Yeah.
and how crazy is that?
Yeah.
We don't know what it is. So if you don't know what 80% of our universe is,
Yeah.
I
You
feel like
can't.
for people to rule it out is kind of foolish.
And we're made to have a God. We're made to believe there's something bigger than us. We're made to have faith, because we as humans, we're different than animals. We don't live on just our instincts. So if you didn't believe in anything and you thought you were just a ball of gas floating through the sky for 80 years or so, why would you even want to be alive? What's the difference? You have to have faith that there's something else. Whether there is or not, it doesn't matter to me. I still have faith that there is. And anybody who says there's not, they can believe what they want.
Yeah.
back to a little bit. Kind of wanted to see what I wanted to see. How do you feel about like life sentences and capital punishment? And I'm kind of switching subjects.
The uh, the human side of me, the part that wants to get mad at people, says if somebody rapes a kid or if somebody murders an old lady or something, let's go ahead and kill them. The reality in a democratic society is that it costs so much to do that. It doesn't seem to be an effective deterrent. We might as well just lock them up for life.
To push back on that,
Yeah.
to house somebody in prison. So let's say that this happens to them at 25, and they live to 80. That's a lot of years you have to take care of this person. And if they're gonna be locked up for life, why? I mean, I'm not trying to be,
No, no.
but just statistically or numbers wise, I know it's very expensive to euthanize, or I guess that's the word, euthanize people the way they do it now.
Yeah.
But I feel like
It's the expense of, you still have to hold them for a while till they get through every trial that they could possibly imagine before we put them to death. And by the time you pay the lawyers to do that, it's more expensive. But by the time you have in their own cell by themselves all that time and not in population, it's more expensive. It just costs more. And if it worked, if it like stopped people from killing people, if we could say the states that had more death penalty deaths had less crime, yeah, hell, whatever. If it's going to lower crime, let's do it. It just doesn't work. If I'm all for it, if it works, heck yeah, let's kill them. Let's give them the needle. But it costs us more and it doesn't work. Many times, by the time somebody does that, by the time somebody does something so bad that they're going to be life in prison or get put to death, seeing some that happen to somebody else is not going to deter them from doing that. Um, Now, when you get into criminological theory, we can talk about what makes people do crime, uh, and there's a lot of schools of thought on that. What makes you let's say you don't have any money right now. What's stopping you from going to the store down the street and holding a gun to the cashier and taking the money?
I think it'd be first off, I want to say morals, but I think even stronger than that is like my situation. I have friends. I don't. It would never come down to that. That's what I think that's a major factor for people.
For me, it was like getting caught.
Okay,
So for me, it's I could go to Jacob and
it's the fear. It's when we do anything wrong, we have a little scale like the little devil and the angel on your shoulder, and we weigh it out. What's the chances of getting caught compared to the reward I get if I get it?
risk and reward.
So if you're in the middle of the desert and there is a stop sign and you can see for like miles and there's no cop there, you're going to roll through the stop sign because your chances of getting caught are really small. You broke the law, but the reward was worth it. You didn't have to stop. You didn't waste 10 seconds. The risk, I'm sorry, the risk was worth the reward. And in many cases, people don't do crime because they have the mental capacity to understand that this is a risk. Is it worth the reward if I get away with it? So getting back to what we talk about people mental instability, if they don't have the ability to do that, they can't see what's going to happen. They don't have any forgot the word, but they don't have any way to see the future to understand the implications of their actions. Then they do them because obviously putting somebody to death is not going to change their mind. They don't know what they're doing right. They don't understand the implications of anything.
So if you go to like a Middle Eastern country, there's a lot of very like I'm sure you know strict laws. So like steal like I don't know for a fact, but hand gets cut off, stuff like that.
It is. And
So
if you remember my first sentence when we started this, in a democratic country is what
yeah,
I said.
yeah.
So we have that trade off. That's a huge trade off.
So
If you're in a communist country or one of those countries, yeah, it's awesome. You have low crime.
do you think there's a middle ground? So like we're very I'm not saying lenient on crime, but I mean you if you go steal, you know,
Yeah.
you're either gonna get a couple years in prison or not gonna get caught. Over there, if you steal, it's very bad.
Yeah.
So do you think there's a middle ground where you could cut back on some punishment, or you think we're pretty much where we need to be?
If we are willing to, as a society, not only pay for that middle ground, but if we're willing to put more innocent people in jail so that we can deter that crime, that's what happens when you breach that middle ground.
So you think more innocent people have to be put in
So
jail?
yeah, yeah, but yeah, they will.
So why?
Because it's going to be a factor of we're going to try and catch more bad guys. They're going to get harsher punishments. But if we give them harsher punishments, what if they didn't do it? What if there's a bad cop out there? What if there's a mistake that they made? You're going to have more of that happen. And then we spend more money on prisons and putting people in prison and having people in community corrections like probation and parole than anywhere in the world. So if you want to build more prisons and put more people in them, you go to all your neighbors and ask them, you want to put more people in prison? Yeah. You want to put the bad guys in prison? Yeah. If they rob the bank, they should go. Yeah. Lock them away for life. Oh, we're going to need more of your money. Oh, no, I don't want to give you any more of my money. I just wanted it to happen. So yeah, everybody wants a perfect world. We don't live in that. We have to make decisions, hard decisions, based on what's best for the safety of society and the punishment and the rehabilitation. You have to add all these factors into it. It's just like I've seen it on the news or whatever, or on TikTok, where they go ask the people, you think we should give free college to all students? Yeah, I think that's great. Sign right here. They haven't signed a petition saying that we should give free college to all students. Now, how much of your check do you want to take out for this? Oh, no, never mind. I don't want to pay for it. Well, who do you think is going to pay for it? The same thing with prison. Who do you think is going to pay for it? We are.
And so for prisons, there's a lot of controversy about private prisons. So what is your take on private prisons? It's a very you can see both sides of it,
Yeah.
but it's what do you think about it?
This is an unpopular opinion in Louisiana, but I'm going to say it. Our state prisons, you can get a job there at 18 years old with a GED or a high school diploma. You can retire. It used to be 20 years. It may be 25 now. You make really good money. You have really good insurance. It costs the state a lot of money for you to be there. And it costs a lot more per prisoner when you have those kind of pay and benefits. Um, it costs the state a ton of money. Bobby Jindal tried to switch some of those to private prisons, and it didn't go over because private prisons pay less. The amount of care is probably a little less in them because you have The less you pay people, the lower quality you have. But in my opinion, we should probably put our low risk offenders in private prisons to save money, and we'd have to close some of our prisons, or let the private prisons run our prisons, let the private companies run our prisons, because they're looking at the bottom dollar, you know. So they may not turn the air condition as low at night on their. They may not have the best food, but I mean, you're in prison.
Yeah, it's not supposed to be
Not
vacation.
supposed to be vacation.
So do you think I was reading a little bit about it? They say like there's some pretty bad living conditions and that was happening. So you think that should be pretty heavily regulated?
Yeah, I think you could still save money if you regulated it. They could still make money, so it would still be advantageous to do it. And I think it's been successful in some areas. Not your high risk offenders, not your top tier people, but at least your low risk offenders.
Yeah, and there's also some pushback is that if you own a private prison, you always want it full.
Yeah.
So I don't see. I know how people push back on that, but I don't see how the prison basically keeps people in prisons. So I think isn't that the Louisiana's government? Not the government,
Yeah.
the courts.
There's a word for it when you talk when we talk about criminal justice reform. There's going to be pushback from that industry, from the industry that feeds the prisoners, from the industry that transports them, for all that, because they make a living off these prisoners. If you're releasing these prisoners in a reform effort, we're going to lose money. So yeah, you're right, but it's too bad.
Yeah,
They'll,
too
they'll,
bad for them.
they'll make it up by, if these people go out into society and become productive citizens, they'll be making money and spending it.
How many of criminals do you think have mental health issues? I say how many. I guess we could probably look it up.
Percentage wise,
Yeah, I don't like to think, but I would say, based on stuff I've read and I would throw it out there, probably 40 to 50% have some kind of mental health issue. 5% have really bad mental health issues. Like, they should be in a home somewhere.
so that goes back to your like a sane asylum type
Yeah.
deal. Oh, we need to have more mental
And those are more expensive,
institutions. Yeah,
a lot more expensive to run. And look, if you look at your population stats in America, I mean, we went to 400 million pretty quick. The whole world went pretty quick. So when you're talking about industrialization and technologicalization, if that's even a word, that's happened over the last couple hundred years. This is a problem that was bound to happen. We were bound to have more bad guys when you have more people, so we have to have more places to lock them up. And when you have more people in tight spaces in cities, there's going to be more opportunity for crime, so you're going to have more. And that's looking at it from that philosophical level.
yeah. And for mental health, so talk about the criminals stuff, police officers. I imagine. I mean, you were in the
We never
force.
did that.
Yeah, we never hit on it. Seeing just crazy things all the time. That's take a toll on you. And I know there's a stat that there's more chance of domestic violence for law enforcement.
Sure.
So like, why do you think that is? And then you can touch on the the mental stability of police
So
officers.
when I was chief of police in Plocherville, there was a test that each officer had to take to get hired to pass the insurance. It's called the Matrix, and it was like 1,000 question test. And I had more officers that I want to hire fail that test, and so they couldn't be hired, than any other reason they weren't hired for, because they would go through these 1,000 questions, and it was a psychological exam, and they would ask questions different ways, and if you answered it a different way, because you get kind of tired, you're doing 1,000. If you answer something a different way, it meant you were lying about it, because usually the first thing that pops up. And if you weren't lying about it, if you were telling the truth about these inclinations you had, then you have the inclinations.
Yeah.
So it was pretty cool, and it's I think it works. I think it works pretty good. But a lot of people that want to be law enforcement officers want to do it for the right reasons, but they don't have the right temperament to do it. So while they may think, I want to do this to help my community, to help other people, to be good, to put bad guys in jail, a lot of them don't have that personality to be able to handle that, because it's a job that makes you handle things, and everybody handles them in different ways. But you see stuff, you see the worst, you see the dregs of society, you see the people beating up on their wife, you see the dope heads, you just see horrible, horrible things. You see people dying in ditches. I've given CPR to people who died, several times throughout my career. I've seen just terrible people do terrible things. And when you see that 40, 50, 60 hours a week, and you go home, it does something to you mentally. It has to. Um, that has to change you, just like being in a war. And there's a word for it, and I did research on about what they call the long term effects of that, like long term trauma that you get from being a law enforcement officer for that long. And over time, it eats at you and it changes the way you. Then you start hating everybody. You start seeing everybody. You don't want to do anything. You don't want to go anywhere. When I retired, within a couple of months, people could see a difference in me that I didn't know was changing. They could see I changed completely. I didn't mind going places and shaking people's hands and talking and hanging out. Before that, I just wanted away from people. I hated people. I didn't want to go near anybody.
But I think most people can attest to that. If you get stopped by a cop, normally they're not happy
Yeah,
to stop you. They're pretty serious, straight to the point.
and
They're doing their job. They're not very cheerful, but you can only imagine the things they see,
it's a challenge when somebody's not getting paid a lot to overcome that.
especially when the person you stop is talking back
Yeah.
and things like that.
Not responding to the best of society. How did you kind of like I say combat those feelings? Like coming home every day, come home, seeing the worst of
Yeah.
society, playing catch with kids.
It's not it wasn't easy when I was younger because I started as a cop when I was 18 years old. I went to the academy at 19, which I was the youngest one in the academy by far. My mom had to go with me buy my first gun. I wasn't 21 yet. I had a letter from the department to get one, but she had to go with me just in case they wouldn't sell it to me. So I started very young, and when I was younger, I didn't compartmentalize it well. As I got older, I was able to I guess disassociate a little bit, and your level of intelligence has something to do with that too. And that's with anything. You can disassociate from one thing to the other. You can let stuff roll off quickly, and it wasn't always easy. And like I said, I've had people tell me when you were in the streets and when you were in the field, you were an asshole, and I didn't see it, but apparently I was because after I retired, they told me I changed. And I have friends now that we worked together for years and they're retiring, and I tell them that, and they come back and tell me the same thing. Yeah, it all changed when I retired. My whole life changed, and I was happy.
Do you see anything? Like, do you notice any difference?
In what?
Like in yourself?
No, I never noticed it. I never. Everybody. That's what everybody would tell me. I just. No, I do. I noticed. I know I didn't want to go around people. I didn't want to do things. I didn't want to answer my phone even, on the weekends or when I was off or whatever. And it just got to where it didn't bother me. And now we go all over. We do stuff. We have lots of friends, and and when you're a cop, everybody treats you a little different because they think you're going to rat them out or they can't say this or can't say that. And so you usually hang around with cops. And if you're an asshole and you hang around with a bunch of other assholes, that's what you're going to become. That's what you're going to be. And I'm not saying that to say that all
Yeah.
cops are bad,
All cops are bad.
but I will say the job does make you think differently of people, and it makes you see society differently. You have slow trauma built into your life from a long period of time.
And then you were a game warden for a while, so does that really compare to being a police officer?
So I've been quoted, and many people have been quoted as saying any game warden could be a cop, but not just any cop could be a game warden. It's a specialized field, just like a homicide detective is a specialized field, or people that work in the drug field, which I would never do. Um, so what's the question?
Like, how does like being a game
Okay.
warden
Yeah,
compare?
yeah, compared to
So,
a cop.
so it's a lot more autonomy. You're in the field alone by yourself. Of course, you don't have any backup nearby anywhere. So you have to learn to solve problems by yourself. You can't just call a supervisor to solve a problem. And over time, you really get to solve problems good, and you get to really be good at what you're doing. And it takes years to do that. So, like I said, any game warden could go work for any police department and probably do well, but you couldn't pick any cop off the street to go be a game warden because you have to be able to have those problem solving skills without the supervisor over you telling you what to do. And it gets dangerous. I know in the streets I fought a lot when I was a street cop. I got in a lot of fights, but I never really felt like I was gonna die. When I was a game warden, there were several times where it got pretty hairy. Fun job. It's probably the funnest job I've ever had. And I was with some game wardens today and we were talking about it. And of course, like anything else, it changed over the years. Probably not as fun anymore, but back in the day we could do what we wanted when we wanted. And we caught a lot of bad guys. So I don't think they would tolerate a lot of the stuff we did back then. But it wasn't cruel towards anybody, but it was just the way it was done. So,
You think in the force there overcorrecting? Like, are they catching as many bad guys now?
I don't think they're catching as many bad guys simply because I mean, some departments have leadership problems, and some departments have over micromanaging problems. When you're doing proactive law enforcement and you're investigating stuff, you really have to have some leeway to make good decisions to catch the bad guys. And if you have somebody standing over you telling you every little thing what to do, you're not going to be able to be fluid in those movements and catch those bad guys. So you need to grant them that autonomy, let them go out and catch them. And I don't think that's happening as much anymore, probably because of policy, and they don't want anybody to violate somebody's civil rights and a lot of other things.
Too standardized.
Yeah.
Switch gears again. I
Okay.
have a good one for you.
All right.
So people don't know you. You had about a foot long beard.
Yeah.
So what's your theory on the beard? So you have a great beard
You
theory.
want to hear the latent testosterone attraction theory?
That's what I want to hear.
Okay. Let's paint a picture here. Why do men have beards and women not?
I don't know.
You don't know.
Maybe I have no idea, but just speculation to maybe attract a mate. We could say like a peacock.
So the reason I think men have beards and women don't is because evolutionarily and historically, women were gatherers, so they were always looking down, and men are hunters, so they were always looking up. So the sun hits your face, you need that camouflage on your face, the wind's hitting your face, whereas women are always looking down. Also has to do with probably the reasons why men have testosterone and women have estrogen, which the testosterone, makes your facial hair and other hair on your body. But women also have bodily hair, but not on their face typically. So does that make sense that women were gatherers and men were hunters as to why men would have a beard and women would?
And just for camouflage stuff like that.
Right.
Makes sense.
So if the amount of facial hair on a man is produced by the amount of testosterone in that male, then a male who is able to produce more facial hair would theoretically have a higher level of testosterone. And if you have that higher level of testosterone, then you're able to produce and protect a woman better. So, my theory is, even though women nowadays say they want guys to be clean shaven and they don't want them to have beards and it's all scruffy and that, inside here, somewhere that they don't even know, they want that beard. They like that beard.
They want that.
They have a latent testosterone attraction theory and they're attracted to a man with a beard, even though they won't admit it. Just like, do you know why men are attracted to women with big boobs?
No.
Does it make sense? Does it?
Oh yeah.
Do they really
yeah,
have
yeah.
a function?
Freaking family feeders.
Because they can rear a child easier. They think if we mate and she has a child, she'll be able to produce milk and raise a child better and easier. Which is not true at all, though, right? So the beard thing's not necessarily true at all either. But nevertheless, there is an attraction there, I believe.
That sounds good.
Is
I
this
like
a
it.
personal experience? I mean, personal experiment that you.
No, but I'd like to
Conducted?
do it. This is based on others' experiments and psychology and genealogy.
Did people treat you differently with a beard?
Sometimes they did. Sometimes they looked at me because it was down to here. So the day I retired was the last day I shaved. I had to shave every day or two since I was in high school, and I said I'm retired. I'm done. I'm never shaving again. And so I didn't for almost 6 years. And people would, man, if I wasn't, especially if I wasn't dressed nice in some old shorts or something. I went into a bank one time and asked them if I could use their restroom, and they said we don't have a public restroom. I went into this same bank after I shaved, and I wasn't dressed any different, and asked if they had a restroom, and they said, "Yeah, right there." So
Dang.
probably thought it was a bum or something.
Yeah. Dang.
So anyway, that's the latent testosterone attraction theory. I'd like to see it in action. I'd like to see you guys do a study on it and maybe talk to other people about it and see what they think about it.
Um, you got anything? You want to- I got something here.
I covered most of my points. Go ahead.
Um, I guess we could probably also look this up, but crime in a Vols Parish, juvenile crime. That's a problem.
What sucks is I was part of a study with two other college professors, and it was a time when the school year went from a 5-day school week to a 4-day school week. So our study was based on juvenile crime if they went to school 5 days that year, and then juvenile crime for the next year when they went to school 4 days. Well, as soon as we got everything set up and started doing the experiment, COVID hit, so nobody was in school for half the year, so it screwed us all up. But crime in a Vols parish is probably on par with everywhere else for the demographics and for the uh, socioeconomics of the area. Probably not any higher. In fact, maybe a little lower because you probably have in a rural area you have closer ties with family and churches than in other areas.
And why do you believe that that's the case for rural areas? That we have closer ties to family and church? Why is the big cities so not?
Well, it's cultural, but you're asking why is the culture like that?
Yeah, in the city, why is the culture like that? Because I just living in Baton Rouge, it's totally different. And
It's more personable here. You have you're in a little closer with your government here. You're not as detached. So in that same sense, you're in a little closer with your churches. They're gonna be smaller. You're in a little closer with your neighborhood. Families live together and see each other in rural areas. Whereas when people move away, where do they go? They go to cities. So a lot of times they're more alone. So that probably creates that cultural barrier.
makes sense.
Yep.
You have more questions?
Yeah, he kind of killed my question.
Sorry.
No, his answer did. I was gonna say like if there was, say, a higher crime in Walls Parish, like being on the school board, like juvenile crime,
Mhm.
in what way would you fix that?
As far as being on the school board and being able to affect juvenile crime, it's not, of course, it's not an easy solution. But if you implement evidence-based practices in education, such as uh, literacy programs, programs that up the value of your teachers, up the value of your curriculum, your education, you can literally lower crime in the long run. Because education is the key. There's places with higher education. Higher education leads to higher pay. Higher pay leads to lower crime. So it's a thousand needles, and you got to do one at a time, and you have to base all your decisions on. And really, when I base a decision, if I'm making a decision about something, I'm going to think in the future, how's this going to affect not only crime but economic status in our parish. And the answer to that's education. Education produces jobs. Jobs reduce crime, and everything else make everything else better. So what kind of guests y'all have in mind coming up?
Right now, we're pretty much anyone we get our hands on.
Yeah.
We're trying to interview anybody and everybody that we have time for. I think everybody's interesting, so
Yeah.